right, it's 9 o'clock. Good to see everyone this morning. We will have, I'm sure, smaller crowds this morning. It is winter break, and I do know of some of our families traveling, and so pray for everyone's safety as they travel. And that just means also that we have 2 boys that won't go to school this week. And so Kristen will go to work Monday, Tuesday, and Dad will have to figure out what to do with 2 boys. Andy, you want to watch them? I don't pay. If you have your Bible, the book of Judges will be in Judges chapter 2. Well, let me back up. I plan to go through Judges chapter 2. We introduced the book last Sunday morning. It's the book that naturally follows the book of Joshua. We finished the book of Joshua in 2 quarters, and we saw how Israel, with the leadership of Joshua, led Israel, the children of Israel, into the promised land that God had promised all the way back to Abraham. If you go to Genesis chapter 12 and 13 and 14 and just continue reading, which we did a little bit of there at the end, and you see where God first promises to Abraham that he's going to bless Abraham, and he's going to bless his descendants, and he's going to make them a great nation, and they will be 12 tribes, and they will inherit all this land. And you even see God directly to Abraham promising to give them a land that, a lot of it they did not build. They will benefit from the labor of others. It'll be a rich land, a fertile land. The Bible describes it as a land flowing with milk and honey. Literally, no. It's a prosperous land. And so they will inherit that land. So the book of Joshua, they did. They inherited the land. They drove the Canaanites out. And we come to the end of Joshua, the book of Joshua. Joshua gives a farewell speech. He gives a farewell speech. He really tries, and I think successfully, lights a fire under Israel, all 12 tribes, to remain faithful to God. That was his plea. And that they remain faithful because they experienced back in Joshua 7, Joshua 8, they experienced as a whole the consequences of disobeying God. And so if one person disobeyed, they all suffered the consequences of that disobedience. So, at the very end of Joshua, Joshua pleads, remain faithful no matter what. Remain faithful to God. Now, I stress that and remind you of that because that comes into play as we get into the book of Judges. We will see that Israel will fall away, and they will do it multiple times as a generation dies off and a new, younger generation grows up, and they rebel against the Lord. In fact, we'll get there. I think it's in chapter 2. We will be told that Joshua, as the writer here of Judges is looking back, that Joshua and all of that generation in Joshua's time, they die off. So we are told that whole generation dies off, that Joshua encouraged to remain faithful to God. And then a new generation will come along, and they will rebel and sin, and they will even turn away from God to idols. And so we'll see that play out in the book of Judges. All right, not too much review this morning. Let's get into the text. Again, we're in the book of Judges. If you just came in, book of Judges. I'm going to begin reading Judges chapter 1, verse 1. We're going to read the first chapter. there's not really a whole lot of commentary other than I may read a section and then stop and just let us process what has been said. Chapter 1, really all of chapter 1 is presenting to us, the reader, that after Joshua dies, there were still Canaanite pagan nations in the land, and the tribes of Israel will continue to conquer the land. The first half of the chapter will read that there are tribes that successfully drive out the people. And then the second half of the chapter, we will read and be told that some of the tribes will not drive out all of the people. They will allow some of the pagan nations of the Canaanites, the Perizzites, and other nations to remain in the land. And I don't know how many times we've talked about that being a big no-no. God told them all the way back in Deuteronomy that when you inherit this land, you drive them all out. You don't let anybody remain in the land, because they will eventually, with their pagan religion, lowercase g gods, their idols, their pagan sacrificial worship services, they will eventually influence you. And we see that it happens. God's not making it up. It happens. It happens. They are influenced and they fall away. And so God says, drive them all out. And so the second half of chapter 1, we will be told that they do not do that. Certain tribes. And they will be influenced because of it. All right, Judges chapter 1. Let's try to get through chapter 1 and into chapter 2 this morning. Now, after the death of Joshua, let me pause right there for just a moment, because we'll actually read about the death of Joshua twice. We'll read it in chapter 1 here as the book is introduced, and then in chapter 2, I believe in verse 6 and following, there's a little section where we read about the death of Joshua again. We'll read about his age. We'll read about the elders of Israel also dying off that served with Joshua. And so we read about the death of Joshua at the end of Joshua. We read about it here at the beginning of Judges, and then chapter 2 of Judges. Now after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, who shall be the first to go up for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? And so again, here you have, Joshua has died. There's still Canaanite nation, people in the land. So they have to finish conquering the land. And so who will be the first to go up against the Canaanites to fight against them? Verse 2. Now, there's a lot of names in here I don't know how to say. I don't know if anyone really knows how to say. I'll give my best effort. And something you need to understand is that when I'm reading and studying in the privacy of my home or office, I would probably do a pretty good job saying these names. And then I get up here in front of you, and I'm not nervous, but I tend to struggle and stutter saying some of these names. And so I'll do my best, and you just read along with me, and we'll understand what's at least taking place here. Verse 2, and the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Indeed, I have delivered the land into his hand. So Judah said to Simeon his brother, come up with me to my allotted territory, that we may fight against the Canaanites, and I will likewise go up with you to your allotted territory. And Simeon went with him. And so first, we have Judah and Simeon. Then Judah went up, verse 4, and the Lord delivered the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand, and they killed 10,000 men at Bezek. Now, I want you to notice the particular phrasing as we go along, that the Lord delivered. As long as the Lord's with them, they'll deliver these nations, or they'll conquer these nations. It's really the Lord that's doing it for them. I believe once we get through some of this text, maybe in chapter 1 and chapter 2, it'll begin to be worded a little bit differently, that the Lord was not with them, or the Lord did not aid or help them. And so just maybe read and pick up on that language that the Lord was with them, the Lord was not with them. And then eventually, as we get later on in the book of Judges, God will allow them to be conquered by other nations, and they go into this captivity and punishment because of their sin. But, all right, verse 5. And they found Adoni-Bezek in Bezek and fought against him. So this is the king, and they defeated the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Then Adoni-Bezek fled, and they pursued him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and big toes. And we've read that a couple of times now. And remember, this was a punishment or a torture. This was a form of torture, but it's something that this particular king practiced. So the Israelites, Judah and Simeon here, are actually just doing what he did to others. And we know that by the next verse, verse 7. And Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to gather scraps under my table. So those would be the kings that he conquered, and he did the same to them. And so now it was done to him. As I have done, so God has repaid me. Then they brought him to Jerusalem, and there he died. Now the children of Judah fought against Jerusalem. So we're still Judah here. Took it, they struck it with the edge of the sword, and set the city on fire. And afterward, the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites who dwelt in the mountains, in the south, and in the lowland. Then Judah went against the Canaanites who dwelt in Hebron. And if I remember correctly, Caleb is one of the individuals who inherited the area of Hebron. Now, the name of Hebron was formerly Kirjath Arba, and they killed Sheshai. All right, there's three names there. You can read them there instead of listening to me struggle. Verse 11. From there, they went against the inhabitants of Debor. The name of Debor was formerly Kirjath Sepher. Then Caleb said, right? So again, going back to Hebron, this is his territory. Verse 12. And so if you have that outline I gave you last week, I gave you chapter 2, I gave you chapter 1 last week. We're introduced to a couple of characters here. And so if you read this, we are introduced to a man, Othniel, who is Caleb's younger brother, but also his son-in-law. And this explains how that happened. So, sounds strange to us, I know, but this is where we read that. Verse 12. Then Caleb said, whoever attacks Kirjath Sepher and takes it, to him I will give my daughter Achsah as wife, and Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. So Caleb's younger brother, he took it. So guess what he gets? The daughter of Caleb. So he gave him his daughter Achsah as wife. Now it happened when she came to him that she urged him to ask her father for a field. And she dismounted from her donkey, and Caleb said to her, what do you wish? So she said to him, give me a blessing, since you have given me a land in the south. Give me also springs of water. And Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. Now the children of Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up from the city of palms with the children of Judah into the wilderness of Judah, which lies in the south near Arad. And they went and dwelt among the people. All right. Let's process what we're reading here. And so we are introduced to Othniel. And I'm drawing somewhat of a blank. Was he one of the judges? I think maybe? No? What? He's the first judge. I think he is. Now, the first handout I gave you from last week had the list of judges, if you can read it. And I'll give you another one with all that, just so that we understand the judges. I believe there's 12 mentioned in the book. In chapter 2, we will read of judges, just plural. We'll read that word judges, that God used judges. It's not until chapter 3 that we are actually introduced to the specific judges. We will begin in chapter 3 to learn about the judges. Yeah, so if you just flip over to Judges 3, and I have these titles above, passages. So beginning in verse 7, you have Othniel. So the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals. And so he's mentioned as the judge. Yeah, verse 9, when the children of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the children of Israel, who delivered them, Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. So, that's chapter 3. We will get into the judges. And remember, the word judge, this is a military leader, someone who will go and deliver Israel out of oppression. These are not necessarily, really at all, the type of judge that we think of today in a courtroom, passing judgment. Deborah may do something similar to that type of judging, but really they are deliverers, military leaders that God used to deliver Israel out of oppression. So just remember that name, Othniel. Verse 17, and Judah went with his younger brother, with his brother Simeon. So we have Judah and Simeon, and they attacked the Canaanites who inhabited Zephath and utterly destroyed it. So the name of the city was called Hermah. Also Judah took Gaza with its territory, Ashkelon with its territory, and Ekron with its territory. So notice, everything we've read, they have utterly destroyed. They've wiped out. I'm struggling to think of a proper phrase here. Wipe out seems kind of. They've driven out, destroyed the people like they're supposed to. It's not too long here. We're going to get into the phrases where they did not do that. But up until now, they've been successful in doing what God said. 18, also Judah took Gaza. All right, we read that. Verse 19, so the Lord was with Judah, and they drove out the mountaineers, but they could not drive out the inhabitants of the lowland because they had chariots of iron. And they gave Hebron to Caleb, and as Moses had said, then he expelled from there the 3 sons of Anak. But the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who inhabited Jerusalem, so the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. Not good. Verse 22, and the house of Joseph, who's that? 2 tribes, Ephraim, Manasseh. It's just referenced here as the house of Joseph, but those 2 tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, are his sons. And the house of Joseph also went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. All right, we're still reading that phrase. So the house of Joseph sent men to spy out Bethel. The name of the city was formerly Luz. And when the spies saw a man coming out of the city, they said to him, please show us the entrance of the city, and we will show you mercy. So he showed them the entrance to the city, and they struck the city with the edge of the sword, but they let the man and all his family go. And the man went to the land of the Hittites, built a city, and called its name Luz, which is its name to this day. Now, verse 27, we're going to finish chapter 1 here and get into chapter 2. Beginning in verse 27, we read about the specific tribes who did not drive out all the inhabitants in the land. And so they did not, for whatever reason. We could say, well, they gave up, or they became tired of driving out, for whatever reason. They did not do what God said. And so then we get into chapter 2, middle of chapter 2, and they are influenced because of these pagan nations. Verse 27, however, so you see the transition here in the text. However, in contrast to Judah and Simeon, Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shean and its villages, and Taanach and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants. Now, there's a lot of inhabitants that it seems Manasseh did not drive out. Of Megiddo and its villages, and the Canaanites were determined to dwell in that land. And it came to pass when Israel was strong that they put the Israelites under tribute, but did not completely drive them out. Now Ephraim, nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites who dwelt in Gezer. So the Canaanites dwelt in Gezer among them. Nor did Zebulun. So here's Zebulun. So we have Manasseh, Ephraim, Zebulun. Nor did Ephraim or Zebulun drive out the inhabitants of Kitron, or the inhabitants of, I can't, too many A's and L's in there for me to try to say, but you see it there in your text. So the Canaanites dwelt among them and were put under tribute. Nor did Asher drive out the inhabitants of Akko, or the inhabitants of Sidon, or Ashlab. All right, we have several. Notice them. You can see them there on the text. Verse 32. So the Asherites dwelt among the Canaanites and the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. So really, all of chapter 2, and we're almost done here, all of chapter 1, the entirety is just the first section, the first half, Judah, Simeon driving out like they're supposed to, everyone, and then the second half are the specific tribes that did not. Nor did Naphtali drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh, or the inhabitants of Beth Anath, but they dwelt among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh and Beth Anath were put under tribute to them, and the Amorites forced the children of Dan into the mountains. Okay? So, for they would not allow them to come down to the valley. And the Amorites were determined to dwell in Mount Heres. All right, let's see. All right, you see the name there. And in Shaalbim, yet when the strength of the house of Joseph became greater, they were put under tribute. Now the boundary of the Amorites was from the ascent of Akrabim, from Selah and upward. All right. Well, that's chapter 1. So really we just see the actions of these tribes. Chapter 2, we will be introduced to the consequences of it. And it's just a reminder to us today that when God says something, He knows there's a reason why. He knows the outcome. He's wiser and smarter than we are. And when He says to do something or to not do something, and we maybe today, if you can think of an example in your mind, but we look at it and we're like, oh well, that's not really going to happen, or it won't happen to me, or whatever. I can be around the example of these immoral people. I can associate with them. I can be friends with them. I can spend a lot of time with them every day, and they won't influence me. And then Paul would say in the New Testament that evil companionship corrupts good morals. That does happen. It does happen. It is easier, we would say, as an example or an illustration, that it's easier to pull someone down than to pull someone up. And so we have to be careful of our influences and who we allow to influence us. And we would also say that there's a difference in, being around people. Like Jesus, he ate with publicans and sinners, right? But there's a difference there. There's a difference. He ate with them. He extended mercy and grace and love to them in order to teach them to open doors. But he surely did not spend enough time to let that negative influence him. So my point is simply that, I believe God knew this was going to happen if they did not drive out all the Canaanites. And so he told them, drive them all out, because he knew. And he knew. And they'll understand why here in Judges 2. So, all right, any thoughts, questions? Let's get into chapter 2. There's a little bit more meat here for us to work our way through. A little bit more happening. Yes, ma'am. The Israelites dwelt among. All right, that's a great observation. That's a great observation. Let's try to notice that as we go through, and So when you read chapter 1, the way it reads to us, and there is probably a lot of merit to it, that as these tribes who were probably large in number and strong in military men, they at first allowed the pagan Canaanite nations to live with them, to dwell with them, and they were the majority, and the pagans were perhaps the minority. And then language seems to swap, where the children of Israel becomes the minority living with the pagans, and they are more or less dominated by these pagan nations that they did not initially drive out like they were supposed to. And so, and we'll see this all throughout the book of Judges as we get into chapter 2. There's a cycle, and in fact, I put it on your handout, just a little description, second page, about almost to the bottom, it says the cycle. We'll see that Israel abandons God, worships idol, so that's the start. God withdraws his blessing from them, allows the enemies to oppress them. Then Israel repents and cries out to God for help, and God brings them out with a judge. But then they rebel again, abandon God, worship idols, and it really is this vicious cycle throughout the entire book. So let's dive in, chapter 2. One of the characters that we have in chapter 2 is someone described as the angel of the Lord. And just for thought, just to throw this out there, many believe that this is the Lord himself, or perhaps Jesus. The word angel, so don't let the word angel here kind of throw you off. The word angel in Scripture is always used to mean a messenger. Sometimes it's even referred to people. It's just a word for messenger. And so this is a messenger, an angel, maybe not necessarily like we would think a celestial being, but a messenger from the Lord. And he is seen throughout the book of Judges. We will see him again in Judges chapter 6 when we read about Gideon. And Gideon probably is one of the more familiar judges to us. So Gideon. The angel of the Lord appears again to Gideon. When he appears to Gideon, Gideon refers to him as the Lord, referencing him as the Lord. And the text reads that the Lord says things to Gideon. Well, let's just turn there. We have a little bit of time. So we're in Judges chapter 6. If we drop to verse 11, Judges 6:11. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth tree And let's see, verse 12, and the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor." And then Gideon said to him, "O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us?" Verse 14, and the Lord turned to him. So you see the description here and the reference to the angel of the Lord, and then that this messenger says that the Lord is with you, and perhaps actually being the Lord there in this form of a messenger with Gideon. But then verse 14, the Lord turned. So he's no longer described as the angel of the Lord, but he's there described as the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites." Verse 15, so he said to him, "O my Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh." Verse 16, and the Lord said to him. And so it seems, as I study Judges 6, and there's several others that would agree, it seems that is the Lord, perhaps Jesus. If we even go to Abraham, if we go to the account of Abraham in Genesis, the latter part of Genesis, where Sodom and Gomorrah is to be destroyed, and you have three individuals that visit Abraham. Three individuals, and they come visit Abraham. Two were angels, and then there's a third individual that will leave after this interaction with Abraham, and then the two angels will continue on to Sodom and Gomorrah, and there with Lot, and they will enter the city. I believe, again, just through my study, that that third individual that came to Abraham was the Lord. Another reference would be even in the book of Joshua, in Joshua chapter, it's either 5 or 6. It's right before they conquer the land of Canaan, or the city of Jericho. It's Joshua chapter 5, the very last part. So Joshua 5 and verse 13, and it came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man stood opposite him with a sword drawn in his hand, and Joshua went to him and said, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And he said, "No, but the commander of the Lord, of the army of the Lord, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have come now." And Joshua fell on his face, and this is really why it seems this is Jesus or God in some kind of human form, because really only God is. Let me rephrase that, because not really only God is deserving of worship, any kind of worship. There's other passages, I can't think of some, but maybe one in Revelation or a couple in Revelation where someone tries to worship an angel, and the angel rebukes the person, says, "Hey, get up, I'm not worthy of your worship." The only person who's worthy of worship is God. Well, Joshua worships whoever this is standing there. With his sword drawn. It says that Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped. And you have no rebuke. Whoever this is does not rebuke him. He accepts this worship. Again, believe that to be Jesus. And so we have occasions where Jesus is that messenger. And so going back to Judges, perhaps that's the case here as well. That's who it is. I can't say that 100%. Just reading the text, studying, seems like it could be a possibility here. All right, let's get into the text. Chapter 2, verse 1. Then the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochum and said, "I led you up from Egypt and brought you to the land which I swore to your fathers." Again, listen to the language that this messenger, I was with you, I led you, I gave it. I don't think an angel would necessarily say, they would have referred to God doing it, but this person refers to which I swore to your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. So it's God in a messenger, probably human form. And you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall tear down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. Why have you done this? Therefore I also said, I will not drive them out before you. And so remember when I said that language is about to kind of swap. It's going to turn over on itself in the reading, where God in Joshua 1, at least the beginning part, said that he was with Judah and Simeon and gave the people over to them. Like God was with them. God was aiding and helping. And now it's going to turn to where I'm not with you. All right, let's see. I was in verse 2, latter part. But you have not obeyed my voice. Why have you done this? Therefore I said, I will not drive them out before you. But they shall be thorns in your side, and their gods shall be a snare to you. So it was when the angel of the Lord spoke these words to all the children of Israel, that the people lifted up their voices and wept. Then they called the name of that place Bochim, and they sacrificed there to the Lord. And when Joshua had dismissed the people, the children of Israel went each to his own inheritance to possess the land. So obviously, this is a reference back before Joshua died, and an encounter there with this angel of the Lord, and what he rebuked them for, and then the people crying out and weeping and sacrificing to the Lord. But then the writer of Judges, whoever it is, most think that it was Samuel, goes back and references Joshua's death again. I told you we'd read it twice. And so with the little bit of time we have left, here's the death of Joshua again, but also here's the reference to all of that generation dying, that older generation dying that was faithful to the Lord, or at least conquered the land. They heard the death speech from Joshua. They declared their faithfulness to the Lord, and something happened from that generation dying to this new generation. I'm sure we could say, well, maybe that older generation did not teach the younger generation. Why? I think there's an application there. There is certainly an application for us why it's so important to teach the younger generation. The New Testament tells, older women, teach the younger women. Older men, teach the younger men. Parents, teach your children. Raise them in the Lord. Teach them. Now, when they get older, they make their own decisions. Obviously, they're responsible for themselves. But there is importance in teaching so that younger generation. But, all right, enough of me talking. Let's get into verse 7 here. We've got a few more minutes. So the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works of the Lord which he had done for Israel. Now Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died when he was 110 years old. Good old age. And they buried him within the border of his inheritance at Timnath-Heres in the mountains of Ephraim on the north side of Mount Gaash. When all that generation had been gathered to their fathers, common phrase in the Old Testament, gathered to their fathers, they died. They went to be with those who had gone before them. So, here's that phrase, when all of that generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord, nor the work which he had done for Israel. You remember when we went through the book of Joshua, several things happened. But several things were put in place to remind Israel of what God had done. So the first was the crossing of the Jordan. And they were to put up the altar of the 12 stones. There was one there on dry land, and then Joshua put one in the middle of the Jordan. But it says that they were to put those memorials of stones there so that when their children's children, or their children and then their grandchildren, when they see the stones and they ask, what are these stones for? What's this pillar of stones for? It was an opportunity for the older generation to teach the younger generation of what God had done for them. And it was a memorial stone to remember the powerful, mighty works that God did for Israel. And it was a teaching opportunity. You know, Kesser's at that age where he asks why. He'll see something. Why? He'll connect some dots, but he doesn't understand why. And it's a teaching opportunity for me when he sees something and he says, why? Well, this is why. And he learns, and you wouldn't believe, or maybe you would because you've had children or grandchildren, how quickly they learn. He can tell you the fruit of the Spirit. He can sing all these songs. He can tell you. He can quote Bible verses. He can tell you that Daniel was thrown into a lion's den. He can tell you that David killed Goliath. He can tell you all of these details. He knows, he learns. And then we see even later, and I've got about 4 minutes, so we see even later, really at the end of the book of Joshua, that the tribes that went to the eastern side of the Jordan, whenever everything was done, and those 2.5 tribes, they went back to the eastern side. They made an altar, not an altar, a memorial for them. And it was misunderstood at first by those on the west, but when everything was said and done and the dust kind of settled, the eastern tribes had this memorial to remind themselves that they were included with the other tribes on the other side. They were separated by this Jordan River, but yet they had this memorial that they were part of the whole. And so we have the memorial at the Jordan. We have the memorial for the tribes on the eastern side. But even on another occasion when Joshua was pleading with Israel, I believe it was in Joshua 22 or 23, he's pleading with them to, again, remain faithful to God. And it says that they spoke to Joshua and they said, we will. So basically, they accepted the challenge. And Joshua said that he took a stone and he put it by a tree. And Joshua said, this stone is a witness to you and your covenant with God and your faithfulness. And it seems like even with all those memorials and Joshua and his leadership and the elders and their leadership, once that generation died and was gone, the new generation, as we just read here, they didn't know God, nor the works that he had done for Israel. The very next verse, and then my time is up. It'll just kind of be our segue to next Sunday morning. Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals, the false gods. And so they'll be oppressed because of that. Questions, comments? It's right at 9:45, so we'll pick up there. I really thought I'd get through chapter 2, but that's never a bad thing to spend more time. We'll pick up verse 11 next Sunday. No more thoughts, questions? All right. Appreciate your time.